Good afternoon, I'm Christopher, male hygienist, and today we're going to show you the Christopher way of pouring and trimming models. Now I don't actually have an impression, so I kind of made one which would look like a tray. So this is what we used over the summer. I'm sure you recognize it. We had to pour up these, and I just taped a popsicle stick to the back so it kind of resembles an impression tray. That doesn't stay very well, but I'm just using it as a guide and you'll see why in just a moment. I have everything all set up. We have our vibrator, 2 things of stone for both the impression itself and for the base, our mixing bowl, and I prefer the medium thickness spatula that is flexible. I think we only have one, and you'll see why I like this in a minute, but you can use whatever spatula you feel comfortable with. I think the only thing I don't have is one of those tiles. My assistant Jackie's gonna grab us a tile. While we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I do with any impression, in a dental lab, if you're lucky, at our dentist's office when you pour impressions, they'll have what's called a surfactant. We don't have that here, but what it does is you spray it inside the model and it breaks the surface tension so that bubbles don't form, which is important, especially if you're making restorations and shipping it off to a lab. The next best thing you can do is just get it a little wet. It's probably wet anyway from when you disinfected it from clinic. If it's not for any reason, just run a little bit of water underneath it like this. Shake it out. Give it a few good pats. So you don't want to see any pockets of water, but as you can see, it's clearly moist, and that's important. Once it's moist, there's a greatly reduced chance of it catching air bubbles while it's in there. It'll sink into each one of those holes very nicely. Look at that tile, I think it's massive. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to mix up the stone. Cold water as usual. It's barely cold. Okay. Now they have measurements all done up for you already, but I have a feel, I have an affinity for the stone, I guess you could say. So what you want to do, if you want to come over here, Jess, is you want to find the right consistency. So what I'll do is I'll put all the stone in first, and then I'll mix it in a little bit of water at a time. Now it doesn't take a lot of water to get this going. Just a little bit more. I have even on some occasions used just enough water on the tip of my spatula to adjust the viscosity of the stone, which I might even have to do now. Sometimes that's all the water you need. So it's not super delicate, but it can be catered to your needs pretty easily. Now the thing about this bendy spatula is you can kind of cut into the bowl, and it will almost completely take the stone off the side, which is wonderful. A little bit more, I think will be good. Okay, next. Come on. Okay, next, we're gonna pour the impression. And the way I did it at a lab, we do a 2-for-1. We do the impression and the base all in the same pour. That means it sets up at the same time and it saves you a lot of time in the future. Now I always start from the lingual side of the anteriors because those are the hardest teeth to pour because they're so small. What you want to do is just put a little on the tongue, and you want to make sure that you watch it roll to the very coronal most part of the tooth and then come all the way back out across the facial side. And that's your visual cue that tells you that there's no bubbles in there. See, that just kind of covers up that hole. It didn't come back out. I don't know if there's a bubble in there or not, so I'm going to bring it down. It'll go back in, make a mess in the same time, you know. Once you have the interiors poured, the posteriors are pretty easy to follow suit. Get that canine over there. See, it's going to the very base of the tooth and coming back up to the top along the gingival margin. Oh, did I not get anything out of the bowl? We'll edit that out. Now as I'm vibrating this, you'll see the bubbles rising to the surface. That's good. So while we're vibrating, use steady, even pressure on the impression to keep it on the vibrator at all times. And just let it kind of pour in slowly. And as it's pouring, bubbles will just come up to the surface. You can also vibrate the bowl of stone on the vibrator before you start. That is a great idea. I don't always do it, but that is a good technique. Once you have all the teeth covered up for the gingival margin, you can just go nuts. Woo! Any bubbles at this point, as long as they're out of the tooth part of the model, don't really matter, because we can just cover them up pretty easily if they're superficial, and it won't destroy the anatomy at all. A little bit more in there. That sounds terrible. Now once I have this much, I shut the vibrator off. It goes over there. Now with the rest of my stone, remember this is a double batch of stone. This is enough for an impression and a base. We're going to scoop the rest of it out and make a little patty on our tile here. Just like that. Just and we're going to make it roughly into the shape of the impression shape, which is slightly triangular. You can wet your spatula a little bit and just kind of smooth it out. Now I have kind of an unusual shape today because I don't have a real impression, but that's pretty good. Now, taking the impression you just poured about a minute ago, tip it right upside down, and it's just going to plop right onto that. And usually they're metal. Just pretend it's metal with me here. Now the idea here, which will save you a lot of time when you're trimming, is to make all of your adjustments within reason while the stone is still wet. So first of all, I want to make sure it's parallel. That's a lot of things that a lot of students have come to with questions, is how come this is lopsided, how come this is like this. If you do it here, give it little taps, and the little tap is like a micro vibration. It's just going to let it, if I do it on this end, it'll go to the interior. If I do it on this end, it'll go to the posterior. And just get it as even as you can. Doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you get to it, the less time you're going to be holding it on the bottom of that base, trying to trim it so that it's parallel to the occlusal plane, which is very time consuming. The other thing I do, and this one isn't so bad because it's already kind of in the shape that we want it, but for the impressions when the stone is all over the place, just take your spatula and make this little sweeping motion. Come in like this, come down at 90 degrees, and just kind of rotate it like a half circle. Pull that away in the shape that you want it to be trimmed. I'm actually going to add this back over here. So when you're trimming, all you have to do is, now at this point you're just going to make it look pretty. You don't have to be like, oh well, I have this enormous blob I have to trim off. You took it off when you were pouring it. So this is a mandibular, so it's just to be rounded. So if this is a maxillary, I would do the same thing. I would make the little obtuse angle here. I don't have a lot of stone here, but you will. You can even kind of see it's not quite. This is a lot easier when it's made out of metal. This is rubber, so it's absorbing all my taps. There we go. Same idea. This side looks good. If you're missing any, same idea. If you scrape some off of one side, you can come back and put it on over here. Same thing in the back. Come in at a small angle, come down, swoop 90 degrees, and rotate away. And just, you want to make sure that you're smearing it against the slate like this, because if you come down straight like this, it creates a suction and it pulls on it, and that can distort the impression. See, I already kind of ripped some of it away there by showing you. Put some of that back. And in terms of time, at this point, the stone is now noticeably starting to set up a little bit. It's still malleable, so don't panic. I don't know if anyone panics when they're pouring impressions. You have plenty of time to do this. Let's see if I can just See, that's nice and smooth now. That's gonna take about 3 seconds on the model trimmer, and that's gonna be exactly what we need. And that's what everyone is spending most of their time with. So the more we can do here, again, the less time at the model trimmer, the faster we can go get pizza. Everybody wins. So this looks pretty good. It's not perfect, but at this point, it's the shape that we want, and there's not a lot of excess. At the same time, you don't want to take off too much. That's kind of hard to show here because, again, I don't have a real impression. But don't go too nuts with taking stuff off the side, because if you don't have enough room and you're trying to do that last step and you're trying to line up the sides with the maxillary and the mandibular, you're going to cut way too close to the vestibule, and they will take points off for that. Okay, that's pretty much it. So we're going to let that set for 45 minutes, and we'll be back for part 2.